March being Women's Month, we have two speakers that are going to talk about women and Planned Parenthood, and also the area of Christian dominionism. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker. She's going to speak for 15 to 20 minutes and then entertain questions. And that is Amy Pitlick. Amy Pitlick. So that's two strikes.
Thanks for enunciating it. I appreciate it.
Okay. That's two strikes for me tonight. She's going to speak for 15 or 20 minutes, entertain some questions, and then we will hear from Karen Freed, who will talk about Christian Reconstruction and Dominion theology. And I'll let you know now that Karen has a much more broad, expanded program on this topic, and we're hoping to have her back in a few months to give us a larger view about all of the things that she does. So we're going to start off with Amy Pitlick. She is the Director of Government Affairs at Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains. And she works to promote political regulatory environment that advances reproductive health and choice and increases access to quality health care services. I'm sure you've read a lot about that in the media lately, and that's why Amy's presence here tonight is so timely. She works to defeat initiatives that threaten reproductive health and choice, and she is on the board of directors of the Women's Lobby of Colorado. She's also the founding co-chair of the Healthy Colorado Youth Alliance. And recently in 2011, she was honored by NARAL. Now, I Googled that, and when I Googled NARAL, all I came up with was NARAL. So what is it?
It's actually called NARAL now, but it used to be the National Abortion Rights Action League.
Okay, I could not, I mean, Google is supposed to give you the answers to these things, and I said that is very interesting. So she was honored by NARAL, Pro-Choice of Colorado, as their Generation Choice Award recipient. So we're very fortunate to have Amy with us this evening. Amy, please come up.
Well, I know I sent him my bio, but it's always nice to have somebody read your bio before you talk. Kind of just like, yeah, I did do that, huh? A little bit more about me. I've been at Planned Parenthood now for 4 years. Before that, I was involved with our direct lobbying consultant. So I've been around the issue in Colorado for about 7 years now. Hail from the great state of Iowa, so getting used to the politics in Colorado was a little bit new for me, and how you go from Boulder to Denver. Actually, I love it down here. It's beautiful. Yeah. I don't get down here nearly enough. I am based up in Denver, though, so it's a lovely, lovely city you all have. I will try to speak with my official Planned Parenthood hat on for the most part, which might get a little wonky and a little boring. I'll tell you right now, there are a lot of why are they doing this type questions that if I answer, I'm probably answering in my personal capacity, because really the answer is I don't know why they're doing what they're doing. And I don't know why they think it's wise that they're attacking women in the manner that they are. And I don't think that their logic is particularly reasoned on this issue. So I'm afraid I probably don't have a lot of answers, but I'll kind of frame the larger environment about what's going on. And then my understanding is Karen's going to probably be a little bit more of that enthusiastic part. I'll probably be a little bit more boring and wonky, but please feel free to holler any questions at any point. First of all, can you all hear me all right? Yeah? Okay, great. I don't want to insult anyone's understanding of the Affordable Care Act, but that's in fact where our story begins. And just real quick, part of the package in the Affordable Care Act requires 10 general areas of services to be covered by plans certified to operate in the health insurance exchange that will be created by 2014. One of those bullet points, just one of those 10, is a bullet that says preventive services, and that's really all it said. During the debate, Senator Barbara McCluskey offered an amendment that we called the Women's Health Amendment. And that said, we know that women have more difficulty accessing affordable care. We know that they tend to access preventive care more often than men do, but there are very real barriers. So we should look at what some of those barriers are and eliminate them for a wider variety of services that women access. The Department of Health and Human Services contracted with the Institute of Medicine to come up with an idea of what those additional services should be. One of the additional services was contraception. So they basically said that contraception should be covered at no additional cost sharing to the consumer. That's where we all begin. It makes sense. The average woman spends 30 years trying not to get pregnant, about 5 years trying to get pregnant. We know that in those 20, 30 years that, a lot of women, including Catholic women, use contraception or some variation of family planning outside of natural family planning. I will also say that if you ask me many questions about human anatomy, I may blush. More on the policy side, I've been known to cover my ears in meetings before with some of our services folks. Are you all pretty familiar with Planned Parenthood? You know what we do? You may know that according to a certain United States senator, 90% of what we do is abortion care, which is not intended to be a factual statement, he later said. We do offer a wide variety of services. Only about 3% of the services we provide are related to abortion services. The rest is educational, preventive, annual screenings, so on and so forth. In Colorado, we serve about 124,000 men, women, and teens annually through 23 health centers throughout the state. We also operate a couple other health centers in northern New Mexico, Wyoming, Nevada, as a part of our region. If you think that's bizarre, we used to operate a health center in West Virginia as a part of the Rocky Mountain region. That was before my time, though. Yeah, exactly. There you go. That's true.
The Eastern Conferences.
So, sort of bringing us up to present day, we knew that these rules were going to be promulgated. We knew that rules around what exactly covering contraception would have to look like were going to come out. They came out, and as expected, everyone on sort of the pro-women's health side of things and everyone on the anti-women's health side of things clashed in submitting rules and trying to get media attention and all of that. One of the biggest opponents, obviously, has been the Conference of Bishops. It's not a surprise. It's part of their beliefs that anything other than natural family planning is wrong. So for the last several months, it's been a long-awaited what the president, what the administration was going to do in terms of accommodating religious refusal. A couple months ago, he came out with his accommodation, we call it. So basically, under this rule that requires insurance companies to cover contraception at no cost sharing, it explicitly excludes churches. So there are already about 335,000 houses of worship throughout the nation that is already exempt from this rule. The bishops didn't think that went far enough, and they wanted that exemption expanded to universities, hospitals, other employers who are affiliated with a religious entity, right? So the president said, okay, let me think about it. He goes back and he comes up with this plan that basically says, we know that access to contraception saves money. Actuarially, we know it's not a big cost driver for access to insurance, right? It's a deterrent for women because $50 a month or more is sometimes hard. But in terms of the science behind insurance, which I'm bad at numbers and I don't really get, it's not a big cost to insurers. And they were willing to say, fine, cut out the employers. We will inform the consumers, the employees, that this benefit is available to them, and we will cover the associated costs with it. So we all thought that was a pretty reasonable accommodation, but of course, our opponents don't agree. So to present day, you all may have seen the picture of the infamous now House hearing where they were talking about religious liberties, religious freedom, but really it was about the contraception rule. And it was a panel of about 8 men, many of them wearing collars, and no women. And that kind of started off this hostile environment, quite frankly, on both ends. the women saying, how can you be discussing this without our perspective? How can you be holding these hearings? How can you be attacking us, and not coming to any sort of common ground, middle ground with us? Because we know, even among Catholic women, 98% of Catholic women use some form of family planning. So there's this huge disconnect between, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, between the bishops, the leadership, and the common parishioners, or those associated with the Catholic Church, who could very well be weekly churchgoers, but in this case they choose not to follow this very strict church doctrine. Additionally, we saw the Blunt Amendment, which took this whole debate one step farther, right? Said that not only should we not have to cover contraception, but actually an employer, on a basis of moral or religious objection, should be able to exclude any service that they don't want covered in their employee's benefit plan. So that raises huge concerns for the highly stigmatized mental health community, HIV/AIDS treatment. The list can really go on and on and on. So for the first time, it was like, all right, this just isn't a women's issue. This is really an attack on the Affordable Care Act. This is really an attack on the basic principle of insurance, which is sort of shared risk, shared protection, not a menu from which to pick and choose. No one intends to break their legs skiing, but that's why we have coverage for it, because sometimes it happens, right? And this whole argument that I don't want to pay for something you might access. How many times, and I'll just use my own personal example, I think I threw sort of this snotty remark at my dad one point, well, I don't want to pay for the war in Iraq. I don't want my taxpayer money going to that. They're using that same argument right now, but in some way it makes sense to them, but it didn't make sense before. I can't really wrap my brain around it. So we are sort of put in the position of trying to explain how insurance works, and they can throw really hurtful, mean, slut-type remarks at us, and that gets the media attention, right? But people are paying attention, and I think the messaging on these issues have shifted in a way that's pretty optimistic. A lot of moderately minded people, a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise have been allies with us, are coming and saying, yeah, we support access to contraception, we support access to women's health services.
I'm sorry, you're saying you're optimistic, which I've actually been feeling less and less optimistic over the last few months, because Colorado just passed that homicide if you have an abortion thing. Oh, and that's here in Colorado, and my understanding was that Colorado Republicans apparently somehow chose Santorum. That's really scary stuff, and I'm not feeling entirely optimistic. Do you know something that we don't?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Please share.
It's only kind of a Band-Aid, but in this particular instance, we have a majority in the Colorado State Senate, and we have a governor who will veto anything bad that happens to get through. That doesn't address the change in environment, but I will tell you this, we have polling on a lot of different issues that say these values that are being expressed by certain elected officials and by certain activist members of a party who show up to caucus or primary are not reflective of Colorado. And in some circumstances, I hope that that makes a very real electoral difference. And we'll know more in November. I think that there are a lot of disgruntled voters that, and I'm guessing folks here span political affiliations, and we get to pay attention to what they're doing, and it's part of my job to make sure that the people who agree with me on these issues understand where their elected officials stand on these issues. I don't think I did a good job making you less pessimistic, and I will say that when I'm sitting at home, couch drinking a glass of bourbon, I share it.
We'll also know more by April 14th when the state delegates send their national delegates on, because the delegates don't reflect the straw poll vote at all.
No, they don't.
And the straw poll vote went for Santorum based on people who turned out largely because of Dr. Dobson's endorsement right before the caucus. They didn't stick around to become delegates. So,
yeah, I mean, I think though that for the first time you're starting to see a lot of mainstream candidates that are taking extraordinarily extreme position. And the best example I have of that is the personhood stuff. Are you all pretty familiar with personhood? FYI, it's coming back. They'll start collecting signatures pretty soon. But it really is the most extreme example of public policy that they're trying to advance. And not only did we defeat it twice in Colorado, we helped defeat it in Mississippi of all places, right? This isn't a winning message, but yet you have every major candidate for the United States president out of the Republican side of the party endorsing this effort.
It has passed somewhere, though, since the Mississippi, right?
It passed legislatively in Oklahoma, I believe.
Right, Oklahoma.
So, but not by a vote of, yes, sir.
Yeah, as a general note, in 2011, there were 1,100 laws introduced in various state legislatures against abortion and birth control. I don't know how many of them passed, but that was kind of a record for 2011.
I should have brought it. I actually have a chart that talks about actually enacted laws. And for about 20 years, it was hovering around maybe like 20 throughout the nation. And then in 2011, you're exactly right, after midterm elections, after things that happened in 2010, it actually jumped up to about 150 new laws enacted. And I mean, we're talking about like 20 years of it holding fairly steady, and then all of a sudden up there, it's pretty impressive to see. Impressive is not the right word.
Just to give some historical context on this, which I think is interesting, is that in the 20s and into the 30s, there were all these eugenics laws because they didn't want certain people having kids, and forced sterilizations, that sort of thing. And the conservatives were all in favor of that sort of thing until they started to realize that, and they were also in favor of contraception. They started to realize that this was empowering women, and women could do what they wanted, and then they totally switched over. Because when it was about controlling people, they were for it, but when they found out it gave people freedom, particularly women, they flipped.
Can't have that.
There's actually a study that recently came out of maybe like the University of Minnesota or someplace like that. And someplace I hadn't expected it to come out of that. To that very point, conclusively links women's access to reproductive health and freedom to higher income, higher educational attainment. And it lays out a very, very, very clear line as to why covering contraception at no cost sharing is important. And I think personally that you are correct, that there's a very real thing here. It's not just about whether or not we really morally oppose use of contraception, it's that it makes us very uncomfortable when women are empowered to live their lives equal to men in certain institutions. To bring it to Colorado a little bit, we've already mentioned that personhood's coming back. Obviously, that is a fairly narrow group of religious affiliated folks that think this is a good idea. One of our arguments is sort of a religious freedom argument in essence. Like, you cannot enshrine one religious value in our Constitution over the multitude of others or the lack thereof. There's also been a religious freedom proposed initiative filed. It's not as far along in the process as personhood is. This is coming out of Focus on the Family, and it basically says government may not burden a person or religious organization's freedom of religion, a person or religious organization's right to act or refusal to act in a manner motivated by sincerely held religious beliefs may not be burdened unless the government provides a compelling interest. How exactly this will play out, I'm not an attorney, but I think it could allow folks to, on these moral bases, treat gay people badly, to refuse to accommodate in housing, to we have a bubble law in Colorado that protects people trying to access our clinics. I think that something like this in our Constitution could say having that bubble law, having that 8-foot protection zone around somebody trying to access services infringes too much upon a person's religious beliefs. So how that could play out in basically every aspect of law, we're not sure, but it concerns us greatly. Obviously, Focus on the Family is a well-funded organization. So we're hoping that we can legally challenge them off the ballot before they even get there, but we'll see. Also in Colorado, we have, sorry, question? Oh. We have Senate Memorial 3, which is basically taking the Blunt Amendment federally and saying we as a state believe that Congress should pass that type of legislation that would allow any employer to select on moral basis what gets covered in their insurance plans. That'll be up for a full hearing in the state Senate on April 27th. We understand it should be a lively discussion. We expect it ultimately to fail, though. Also, we've had 2 fetal homicide bills introduced in Colorado, one of which we were able to defeat in its House of introduction, which was the Senate. The other one was a House bill, and it has made it all the way through the House and is coming up on Monday for a hearing in committee in the Senate, and we expect that to die. I also want to touch on a little bit of the issue, and we kind of all dodged a bullet down here in Colorado Springs with Memorial Hospital and that selection process going to the University of Colorado. But the issue of Catholic ownership of hospital systems is a tremendous concern to us. Now, nationally, 1 in 6 Americans receive care at Catholic-owned hospitals, and those hospitals are under the ethical and religious directives of the Catholic Church. So there's sort of a menu of services that they cannot provide, abortion being one of them. In many cases, emergency contraception to a survivor of sexual assault would not be provided. How they would treat end-of-life decisions is based on the teachings of the Catholic Church. How they might treat partners of a same-sex patient is under the direction of the teachings of the Catholic Church. And these are, in often cases, previously publicly held hospitals at which you could receive care free of bias, we would say, and now that's no longer the case. So I urge you all to understand which hospitals in your neighborhoods are owned by religiously affiliated organizations, because that really could impact the information you receive and the care you receive. Something we're watching pretty closely and has been an issue in Colorado, especially over the last 3 years. I think in Colorado now it's about 60% of hospital beds are under Catholic ownership. So that's kind of the Colorado snapshot. I will stop there, having sort of framed the current events, and take any questions.
I still can't understand why some kind of law can't be passed that doesn't allow people to deny legal services that are legal in the country. It just boggles my mind.
I think that's an excellent point, and it's one that I'm trying to wrap my brain around as a policy person. We have all of these refusal clauses and conscious protections that really flow one way, and there's no protection that flows up. And I don't think, I'm not an attorney, I don't think that there's a constitutional reason why there can't be a balance, but so far there's been so little will. We did contemplate a bill that would protect providers within a Catholic hospital, for example, from providing care that was within their scope of practice, upon their best medical judgment, sound practice, all of that, and there was no appetite from the hospital association, so I think there are things we have to work out there, but I think that's one of the biggest questions, is how can we live in a world where those protections don't flow both ways? If you have any brilliant ideas, I'll give you my part.
If you're running a restaurant or a hotel, there are public accommodation laws and expectations of service for any person entering. If you applied those to legal medical procedures to hospitals, it makes the same logic. For public accommodation,
I think you're thinking the ADA, which applies to anyone who serves the public, but the ADA is something different than what she's talking about. The ADA doesn't cover this kind of thing.
They got an exclusion from that.
You know, again, I'm not an attorney. I think it's complicated case law that really, I mean, after Roe versus Wade passed, about 3 different federal pieces of legislation were enacted, including the Church Amendments, the Weldon Amendments, and it just created all of these. As a medical provider, you cannot compel me to do anything, and that's fine. I understand that, yes, if I own an apartment building, I am prohibited from discriminating against a person applying to live there if they're gay, or if they're of certain, in Colorado, they actually recently added the gay part, but of certain ADA classifications, of certain other classifications. I don't have a good answer for you.
Is there a matching fund or a fund for Plan B for rape victims, so no rape victim will go without the opportunity to use Plan B?
There's a state law passed in 2007, I believe, that says if a survivor of sexual assault comes into an emergency room, the emergency room must at least provide information of the availability of emergency contraception. There's no requirement that it be provided. There's no funding mechanism for it to be provided. And there's kind of a loophole where if you are at a Catholic hospital and everyone refuses to provide information, can you really find somebody to provide that information? We don't know, but no, directly to your question, there isn't really a mechanism to ensure that women in that dreadful circumstance are being treated the way most medical professionals would choose to treat them, or given access to
Does
information.
Planned Parenthood have a fund for funding Plan B for rape victims?
Not explicitly for that, but we are a sliding fee provider in many cases, and certainly if women are unable to pay or something like that, I'm sure they would be.
Would you accept donations specifically for that?
What about the last resort fund? I contribute to that.
Yeah.
Would that cover?
I would think so. We also have the Freedom Fund in Colorado. There are definitely funding things out there. I think when you're talking about the necessity of accessing emergency contraception within a small window, I'm not sure that women are adequately protected. But yes, I mean, we would welcome directed contributions to a Plan B fund. That would be something we would certainly do.
Now, in any rape investigation, there's a police officer, a woman, usually, that is in contact with the victim. Do you think the police department would support an effort of notification of funds available?
I think it probably depends greatly on the municipality in which that police department lies. And I think it depends on, I don't think you could do anything policy-wise that would compel an officer to provide that information, but certainly I think it would be a great professional training opportunity to make sure that they were equipped with that information. I suspect they would say that that's the responsibility of the medical provider.
Amy, thank you very much. Amy, thanks very much for providing some very enlightening information on that topic. And would you consider perhaps writing an article that might go into our monthly newsletter that might illuminate some of the specific topics that were raised here tonight that perhaps were a little questionable?
Yeah.
That would be great. Let me at this point state that I do have an honorarium for each of you ladies for spending your time here. The only problem is that I don't have it with me, that it's somewhere else. So just so you know, and I will make arrangements to have this brought to you, we have a particular honorarium that we provide to our speakers, and it is a Michael Garman miniature statue. Michael Garman is an artist that does a lot of Old West type of artwork, and he has a shop down in Old Colorado City. He has a particular piece called the Pathfinder. And the Pathfinder in American history was that individual that was out ahead of people and of the troops, finding the path, finding the way. And certainly we believe that both of you are pathfinders in your particular areas. So not having that to actually give to you, I at least wanted to let you know what's in store for you. Also, I neglected to mention at the beginning that should you require the use of facilities, they are actually, sorry Marianne, they are actually behind this wall right here. So you just need to go out. The best way is to go out through the door, not go through the wall to get to them. And they're just a little bit more on this side of this hallway that runs there. So should you need to use those, they are available. It's now my pleasure to introduce Karen Freed, and I'm going to do a little more reading than I usually like to do, but she has such an interesting bio that I wanted to avail you of it. It generally surprises people within the activist community to discover that Karen's profession is not necessarily of the political science persuasion. Rather, she is an artist and a politically active one. She has a BA in Visual and Performing Arts from the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs, and has devoted the first half of her working life to working with deaf children. I need to talk to you about that since I'm in Sertoma, and you may not know anything about Sertoma, but that's our one of the things that we concentrate on. Working with deaf children both at the Austin School for the Deaf in Texas and, of course, the Colorado Springs School for the Deaf and the Blind. She's a self-described freethinker and has a political background in research, which originated with an art project, of all things, leading her to a startling discovery and a roundabout introduction to the Christian Reconstruction movement, which is a little-known and entirely misunderstood religious right political movement. Christian Reconstruction and Dominion theology, I'm sure many of us have heard of Dominion theology, is probably the single reason for the dissolution of Karen's once tentative relationship with organized religion. Christian Reconstruction has played a sizable and decisive role in the engineering of the GOP's war on women, and will be the substance of Karen's topic this evening. Karen Freed.
I'm very happy to be here, and I thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Unfortunately, I am going to have to do a little bit of reading. Can everybody hear me? Yes? Okay. I'm going to have to do a little bit of reading to you because this is such a massive amount of information. In order to keep it straight, I have to try and write myself notes. There are a lot of individuals, organizations, Christian right, religious organizations involved, and as we are all aware, I believe, that the Christian Reconstruction movement is basically an ideology that dictates that Christians, fundamentalist Christians, are to take dominion over the 7 spheres of secular society. And what they mean by that is that in order to take control of the 7 spheres, they will first, of course, get themselves elected to public office. And so what I mean about the 7 spheres of society, Dominion ideology articulates this through what they call the 7 Mountains Mandate. And the 7 mountains represent these 7 spheres. So we have business. I don't know if you can see this, and I had meant to have this as a presentation. However, business, government, media, education, family, arts and entertainment, and religion. And so how would they go about this? Well, it sounds a little bit scary, a little bit, well, a lot crazy actually. But the thing is, they've got think tanks, they've got organizations, they've got political machinery set up to help them do that. And actually, I started out, the reason that Gary Betchum actually referred me to Becky Hale was because I had originally given a presentation entitled Biblical Capitalism. And Biblical Capitalism, let me just read to you, is a flyer / poster that for one of the original presentation that I do, and which Harvey had mentioned. Biblical capitalism is the belief that unregulated capitalism is biblically mandated. The religious right is well known for its regressive social activism, but less publicizes the role it has played in the war against progressive economic policy, labor unions, the regulatory structure, and social safety net. Now, this is a quote from Rachel Shabachnik, who is a political researcher for Talk to Action. And she is not alone in her research. There are many websites, journalists. Right now, I guess originally, researchers have been trying to sound the alarm bells for the last 30 years and telling us to look, we need to pay attention to this, we need to pay attention to the politicization of the Christian right and what their platform, what their agenda actually is. Well, we did not. And so now we've come to this stage and suddenly politicians, voters, we're all standing around scratching our heads and wondering why are we hearing our politicians refer to the Bible when they're talking about policy, or refer to their religious beliefs when they're talking about policy. So the biblical capitalism discussion actually covers all of these 7 mountains, and I provide examples of the political and religious atmosphere, how the two inform one another, and give plenty of examples. Now, that particular presentation is about 2.5 hours long, and because I have to be very specific, and I have to be accurate, and I have to provide you examples with, okay, here's the religious, ideology that's driving this, and here is the policy, and we go back and forth and back and forth. And this covers all of the areas that I mentioned, the so-called 7 mountains. So it's a lot of information, including in the military. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Mikey Weinstein. Weinstein, who's just here at the beginning of the month promoting his book, No Snowflake in an Avalanche, and he talks about the Christian fundamentalist move to take over in the military. It's a really coercive, highly coercive movement that they have going, and it's starting with the Officers Corps, the Air Force Academy, West Point, and this goes throughout. So that is an entire presentation all to itself. So what I wanted to wrap this up with is to say that this discussion is the role of the role of the secretive American Legislative Exchange Council, which happens to be, I don't know if anybody here has heard of ALEC, the co-funded organization that gathers Christian right politicians, and they sit together and they write the laws that they then take to the states and pass in the state legislatures. And I have to say they cover every area. The laws that they are promoting, that they want passed, cover every area of our lives, affect everything, whether it's education, whether it's energy policy, whether it's women's rights. Just the whole gamut. It really does cover the 7 mountains. They're not so much, ALEC is not so much into the social conservative agenda, but they do promote these groups and vice versa. This is kind of a hand-in-hand marriage between moneyed interests, corporate interests, and the Christian right. And because they have all of this money, and also we know with the passing of the Citizens United, that they're going to be throwing tons and tons of money to get more fundamentalist Christians elected to office. So just real quick, before I go into the presentation, I have sort of a timeline for you, and I think before we actually talk about the war on women, I'm going to have to go back just a little bit and talk about the midterm elections in 2010 and what happened with that. But before I do that, I wanted to say something about this. Now, I know it's a little goofy looking, but this is a website that's actually from the Wiki Project. The woman who developed this, ever since the contraception issue kind of blew up in the media, and the Susan G. Komen issue with pulling funding from Planned Parenthood, they decided to keep a record of all of the laws that are being proposed all across the country, state by state, and they're doing a wiki project. The lady who actually did, well, I don't know if she designed this, but who put up this website to help to help fight against this war on women. Not only are they doing the wiki project, but they're helping to promote the We Are Women's or United Against the War on Women. They call themselves We Are Women, United Women. They have a website, and they're having a march to all across the country, all 50 states. It's a really grassroots movement. It started with one woman and one video and her feelings about, the ban on contraception, the personhood amendments. It really is an all-out religious war against women. And so I guess I have to warn you, because it says on here warning language. Even though this woman is an attorney, she does not mince words. So if you happen to go to this site, you have to look at the article, you'll see them, and some of the language is, but it's not the first person I've heard just go off, because it's just amazing what's happening at the moment.
Just like Mikey Weinstein, he's the same
Just
way.
like Mikey Weinstein, yes, she is. She's the black lady version of Mikey Weinstein. So to start, I wanted to kind of give you an idea. If you were not interested in going to this website due to sensibilities about language, there is another website. It's called, I don't know, you may even be familiar with it, considering this is the Freethinkers group. It's called ProPublica USA. Leah Burton writes for this, and this particular article is called The Dirty 30, March 2012 edition. It's a little bit misleading, because what she refers to are all that somebody mentioned the 100 or 1,100 different bills that have come out in legislatures across the country, state by state. Well, she happens to list them, all of them, proposed, passed, and she categorizes them, and you can go there and just be amazed. However, she goes on to talk about the war on the separation of church and state, health care, on Islam, and all of this from a religious biblical worldview that's being promoted by these Christian right politicians.
What was the website again?
It's called ProPublica USA. ProPublica USA.com.
What was the first website?
Actually, I wanted to let you guys know that if anybody is interested in receiving an email with my sources, I have this. I have all of the links, and I can send you the email if you're willing to provide me with your email address. And that way, we don't, if there's something that interests you, you can have it. I've got the title on there, the link, the website name, or the source name, the date. And you guys can just, receive the email, click on it, and there you go. If you'd like to do that. That way you won't have to search for this. Okay? So having said that, I just wanted to really quick name off some of the, this just goes on for, let's see how thick this is. All of these laws passed since the 2010 election. We start off with the anti-abortion laws. The Blunt Amendment obviously is in here, and the variations of the Blunt Amendment. Arizona has just now proposed a bill that mirrors the Blunt Amendment, and this is something that needs to be understood, that these laws, these proposed bills, once they start in one state, they're going to catch on fire, and they're going to go from state to state to state to state to state. We're all going to have to deal with this. This is not just relegated to Texas or Oklahoma. This is everybody. This affects us all. We have also, this is an interesting one, the legalization of the murder of abortion doctors. What they are, South Dakota actually flirted with the law to make the murder of an abortion doctor legal as self-defense. When South Dakota was forced to drop the idea of murdering abortion doctors, Nebraska and Iowa picked up on the idea. And I guarantee you that these Christian fundamentalist legislators that we elected, well, I'm not going to say we, I have no that, but that were elected in 2010, will be doing this because while we have the ACLU, the Christian right has something called the ACLJ. And there is a group within that that's working with the ACLJ. It's a legal group, and they have been taught to look at law not from a constitutional perspective, but from a biblical perspective. Yeah. So also there is the move to ban sex education in public schools. They want to go to abstinence-only education, and there are several laws listed. Personhood laws and fetal rights and mandatory ultrasounds, which Amy already covered. This just goes on and on. Taxing abortions, the war on birth control and contraception, which we've already covered. Here's an interesting one. The war on human fetuses in food. And this is just something, it's kind of a dog whistle to the extremist Christian right fundamentalist voters, the values voters. And it's an attempt to demonize the left, basically, is all it is. I mean, nobody's putting fetuses in food, just so, you know, we're clear. Nobody's doing that. But there is a law. We need a law about it. And then it goes on from there, the war on church and state. So you can feel free to peruse that if you're receiving that email. So, like I said, before we get into this mindset and describing this mindset that these people are operating under, we need to understand how we got here to begin with. And so we have to kind of start with the midterm election in 2010. Phyllis Schlafly, is everybody here familiar?
What a gal.
This anti-equal rights amendment, she's been at it since the 70s, right? Eagle Forum. Now this is just one of the Christian right organizations that puts out a scorecard, congressional scorecard, a candidate scorecard, rating them on how well they uphold the biblical worldview, according to Phyllis Schlafly and Pat Robertson and James Dobson and so on. And in 2010, she put out, well, not she personally, but her organization put out the 2010 candidates endorsed by Eagle Forum PAC. State by state, they listed them. And you probably can't see this, but in blue she's got all of the names, and the number of Christian, and these, I have to tell you, these are not, obviously not moderate Republicans. What the Republican Party did, or the Christian rights in the Republican Party, was purge. This is like the first round of purges in the Republican Party. And they replaced their moderate Republicans, your run-of-the-mill John McCain types, with extremist Christian fundamentalists. And this is 3 pages worth, and they've got check marks next to in every state where they won a huge landslide. Well, how big was that landslide? Okay, just in the House, here's a House map. This is from the New York Times. This is following the midterm election in November. And this shows the gains. You see all the red as compared to the blue? Yeah. This is where we're at. And this is not just at the federal level, this is also at the state level. We have governors now that are Christian fundamentalists who forget what the polls say, what your constituents say, what reason tells you, science, research, common sense. It doesn't matter. They don't care. They have their agenda, and they now feel that they have a mandate to impose that agenda on the rest of us. So that is Phyllis Schlafly and our new map. So this is what happened in 2010. The Nation Institute actually in October of 2010 was putting together all of these little pieces. We had Alec over here and the Koch brothers and the Scapes and the DeVoses and all of these moneyed interests that fund the religious right. And then you had the Tea Party. And what they discovered was that the Tea Party and the evangelical Republican base, the voting base, pretty much overlaps. I mean, you have these people on the fringes that are libertarian, but if you look at the libertarian agenda, I mean, it's exactly the same. It matches exactly. There's really no difference, except they claim that they're not really into the social issues. You know, we're not concerned about that. But then again, you take Ron Paul, for instance, and Ron Paul, although he claims to be a libertarian, is not. He's a Christian Reconstructionist. Yes, he is. And he recently was interviewed by Yahoo News, where he, the story was, the headline was that he had enlisted Michelle Bachmann's staffers for his campaign to appeal to the Christian right. And in that interview, he admitted that his economic policies are based on Scripture, which is Gary North's Biblical Capitalism, which happens to be a 10,000-page expose where they have discovered justification for all of their economic policies: deregulation, taxes for the wealthy, Jesus opposes the minimum wage. They found religious justifications in the Bible. And this is what they're preaching in these churches all across the country.
Very common.
Yes. Mother Jones, on November 4th, 2010, reported just after the election, Ralph Reed's T-Evangelicals. And let me just read real quick. Armed with post-election survey data Ralph Reed had commissioned through his new Faith and Freedom Coalition, Reed declared that yes, the party was a factor, the Tea Party was a factor, but the real engine of the GOP's blowout victory Tuesday was, wait for it, evangelical voters, most of whom co-identify as Tea Partiers. At a press conference with pollster Glenn Bolger from Public Opinion Strategies, Reed insisted that the largest single voter constituency was social conservatives, and they went overwhelmingly for Republicans. And now, while this Mother Jones article actually poo-poos Ralph Reed, you're just talking, you really didn't have that much effect. Well, I'm going to say that yeah, you did. Yes, they did, because they do these voter registration drives and pulpit electioneering, which is against IRS regulations, but they do it anyway. And prior to the 2010 election, I don't know if anybody knows who David Barton is. David Barton is the founder of Law Builders. He's a Christian Reconstructionist and a pseudo-historian that puts out Christian nation constitutional history. So, you know, forget all that secular stuff, you know, forget, you know, separation of church and state. That's not really what the founders meant. This is what he preaches, and he was invited time and time again to Fox News to appear on Glenn Beck's show. And so this was not just an effort that was promoted by pastors. I mean, this included politicians, this included money interests that were funding them, this included Fox News, this included that entire right-wing echo chamber that was helping this. So it wasn't, you know, just a small effort. I mean, so I'm going to say yes, they had a very huge effect. And also it was, and we all realize that in midterm elections, voter turnout is a lot less than it is during the major national elections for the presidency. And what they do is they take advantage of voter apathy. When we all stay home, they all run to the polls with their Judeo-Christian voter guides. They don't ask questions. Whoever, Phyllis Schlafly, James Dawson, whoever be it, C. Peter Wagner says you vote for, that's who they vote for. And in their name, you know, because these are godly individuals, we're going to vote for our own. Well, they don't ever stop to think, how does that going to affect them personally? So the New York Times, that was the map that I showed you from the New York Times. Catherine Joyce, who writes for Religion Dispatches and has also written a book called called Quiverful. Now, this section of the talk, it gets into the sort of ideology that these people, especially particular focus on the war on women, the kind of ideology and mentality, the place that they're coming from when they talk about these women's issues from a biblical worldview. What do they mean by that? They're not just talking about banning birth control, outlawing abortion. That's not the end of it. They're talking about women's submission. There are politicians, right-wing politicians out there talking about how women shouldn't have the right to vote, women shouldn't be allowed to work. And actually in the ProPublica USA, on that list there, they're attacking the food stamps and the WIC program. And part of the reasoning for them is that, well, we don't want women out there working. You're supposed to stay home and take care of your children and homeschool them. And so we're going to chisel away bit by bit to accomplish that, to get it to the point where you are, especially poor women. I mean, this really, you know, middle class maybe not so much affected right now, but the poor are very much affected by this. I mean, just imagine if you get pregnant, there's no way to have an abortion. You know, there's no birth control. Let's outlaw that. And okay, well, what about health care? Well, you know, that's not our concern. Well, yeah, what about food? Well, that's also not our concern because God will provide. That is their reasoning, and I'm not joking. So Catherine Joyce, she had written a short essay on women's liberation through submission, and evangelical anti-feminism is born. And you may recognize, if you've listened at all to Michelle Bachmann, who was running for president, Sarah Palin, who was running for vice president last time around, kind of dog whistling this women's submission issue. Let me just read to you a little bit of this. Women's liberation through submission, an evangelical anti-feminism is born. This October, more than 6,000 women gathered in Chicago for the True Woman Conference 08, a stadium-style event to promote what its proponents call biblical womanhood, otherwise known as complementarianism, or most bluntly, the patriarchy movement. We all understand what patriarchy means. Man at the head, the woman following 3 steps behind. Women gathering to support the patriarchy movement, ? It's evangelical counterculture at its most contrarian. The Associated Baptist Press explains the relationship of biblical womanhood to feminism, highlighting an ambitious initiative that arose from the meeting, a signature drive seeking 100,000 women to endorse its Woman Manifesto, which the ABP writes aims at sparking a counter-revolution to the feminist movement of the 1960s. To outside observers of the patriarchy movement, this darkness of the calls for gender hierarchy often seem amusingly outdated, not to mention historically misleading. Feminist blogs, Feministing and Pandagon have definitely dismantled some of the speakers' Leave It to Beaver idealizations of the 1950s as a time when women were universally protected. Though only just under 3,000 women have actually signed the document since its unveiling on October 11th, the fact that it exists and the campaign to gather such a large showing of public support reveals something important about this movement, that its followers don't view themselves simply as a remnant of polite churchy women holding out against a crass culture, but rather as a revolutionary, body-wagging, countercultural rebellion against what they see as the feminist status quo. So you kind of get the idea of what the patriarchy movement is about. Now they don't just focus on women's submission. This has to do, they have an entire worldview agenda surrounding just the family issues. And what they mean by that is that, again, like I said, they want women to stay home. You are not to work. You are to have as many children as humanly possible. You are there to support your husband, to revere him, and he is there to support the church, to revere the church. So that we've got this hierarchy going on. And we all know what happens in homeschooling. We're not talking about liberals homeschooling their children. We're talking about flat earth science. You know, this is what we're talking about. This is what you're supposed to do. So there's a woman whose name is Vicki Garrison. I chose her website just really shortly because she is a walkaway. She's a mom of seven children. She's a former adherent of the Quiverful movement, a growing segment of Christian fundamentalists who advocate biblical patriarchy, prolific motherhood, homeschooling, courtship and betrothal, And what she's referring to here in the quiverful movement is a sect within the, and I have to say it's being mainstreamed. Is it anybody familiar with the Dugars? 19 kids in the county on, I've never seen it. The only way I know about it is from having read about it. And yeah, this is the mainstreaming of this patriarchy movement. Michelle Dugar was actually recently at a Christian conference where she handed out a flyer to the women. It was for the wives only, not for the men, only for the wives, to teach them how to become one of these biblical women and what their role should be. Anyway, and she says, and other crazy like that. Garrison tells the story of how she came to embrace the extreme lifestyle and why she left at her No Longer Quivering blog, which is nolongerquivering.com. She's writing here for salon.com. They have an open forum where anyone can establish an account and write a blog. But she had apparently a guest write for her by the name of Jonathan W. Rice for No Longer Quivering. And the title of this is Fear and Loathing in Jesus Land, the Christian Right and Quiverful. And the reason I chose it is not so much that it focuses, well, partly because it focuses on the patriarchy movement, but also because it really ties together this whole idea that these people have become politicized. And these people are running to the polls to vote for people that say that they will establish this into law. So it begins. As the content of our faith changed, so did our conceptualization of Jesus. He was no longer a God of love, but a muscle-bound tyrant. And thus, and she's not joking. I know this all sounds weird if you haven't really delved a lot into it, but really these are the things that are being preached, and these are the things that these people are waist deep in, these politicians.
Actually, deadly serious.
It is. They are deadly serious about it. We laugh, but it's not funny anymore. Anyways, he was no longer a God of love, but a muscle-bound tyrant, and thus over the gradual course of time, we became foot soldiers in a zombie army, doing the political bidding of our Christian right masters. And that's the part I wanted to really bring home. Doing the bidding, and that means voting. That means contributing to campaigns. That means going out knocking on doors. All of this done through the church. Recently, I was looking at a thread on a web forum for women who'd escaped from the quiverful Christian patriarchy movement, and he refers to this as QF and CP. So from now on, quiverful and Christian patriarchy. For those unfamiliar with QF and CP, it's a fraction within fundamentalist Christianity. Some of those proponents are within Christianity. Some of those proponents are Doug Phillips of Vision Forum, Mary Pride, R.C. Sproul, J.R. Vody Bauchman, and Nancy Campbell. It's been popularized by the Dugar family's TV reality show. They have 19 children at the time of this writing. Actually, 20. And made infamous by Rusty Yates, who, goaded by a fanatical minister, coerced his clinically psychotic wife, Andrea, to continue having baby after baby until she finally snapped in June 2001. Drowning her 5 children in the bathtub of their Houston home. Rusty, for his part, went on to remarry and is now siring replacement children. The word quiverful is taken from Psalm 127, 4:5, which reads, "As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate." In a nutshell, the QFCP movement bans all forms of birth control. Families should have as many children as God gives them. These children are homeschooled for the most part in the hopes that they'll become an army of the Lord's mighty warriors who, through sheer demographic force, reclaim America for God. Females are kept in perpetual servitude through earliest childhood, where they are considered the property of their fathers and spend their days caring for younger siblings. When a girl reaches puberty, she must pledge her purity to her father. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever taken note of the purity balls that sometimes happen at the Broadmoor. This is what they're referring to. Yes, it's not as benign as it seems. often in writing. Once the father finds it, now, yes, this marriage contract has to be put down in writing. Once the father finds a suitor to his liking, he transfers his ownership of the young lady to her husband. Adult women in the movement are not allowed to work outside the home and usually forbidden to speak in church. Obviously, they can never be ordained, and based upon a quirky interpretation of an obscure biblical passage, Isaiah 3:12, they're also forbidden to vote. Now, this is a walkaway that's telling us this. This is what goes on. This is what these Christian fundamentalist pastors write in the books that they put out. This is what they put out in the DVDs that they send from church to church to church all across the country. So just to give you an idea, this is not just one person saying this. This just happens to be the sample I chose. Lurking beneath the QFCP lifestyle lies the teachings of R.J. Rushdoony, the leading exponent of a dire and militant form of Calvinism called Christian Reconstructionism. In his massive tome, Institutes of Biblical Law, he advanced the overthrow of modern democracy, replacing it with a theocratic state in which all the laws of Leviticus are imposed, including the death penalty for disobedient children, adulterers, and homosexuals. Also, as per his penalty for disobedient children, also as per his reading of the Bible, the theocratic state would reintroduce slavery. Hardline, yeah. And then you can see David Barton go out there on Christian Broadcasting Network and prop this ideology up. Yes, slavery's in the Bible, and therefore, yes, we support slavery.
I was listening to the Burkham now.
So is child sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, we would hope that they would stop there at least.
Even Catholicism endorsed slavery.
In mid-February 2010, a thread title on the forum caught my eye, "How did you get yourself into this mess?" The author, a female refugee from the movement, and here he's referring to Vicki Garrison, was wondering how she and so many others could have fallen for it in the first place. After reading it, I again realized how closely the QFCP movement intersects with mainstream evangelicalism and fundamentalism, and how easily I too could have been recruited given the wrong circumstances. How, one may ask, do people get into such a seemingly bizarre religious movement? And how had I in the past been in danger of being sucked in myself? The answer boils down to one simple word: gradually. The substance of my gradual experience, which I'll summarize here, is the shared story of countless rank-and-file believers who come under the broad labels Pentecostal, Charismatic, Evangelical, and Fundamentalist. It was all really positive in those early idealistic years, loving Jesus, hoping to save the world, helping homeless people, having an abundance of real friends who stood with me through thick and thin. It was all good, really good. And then he goes on into the song. A radio program called Focus on the Family, which we're all familiar with, that I used to hear doling out advice to crisis-racked families, was becoming politicized. Through the show, and then through the warnings of Tim LaHaye and others. Now, Tim LaHaye is one of the founders of these Christian organizations. I think it's, which one is it? He is with Paul Wayrick, and that also the name escapes me. It's either Heritage Foundation, one of those Christian organizations he is co-founder of. And also the writer of the Left Behind series. Are we familiar with that?
Yes.
The Rapture books that have turned into DVDs and that Christian Zionists are now quoting as fact. I began learning of sinister threats being hatched against us by people called secular humanists. LaHaye, in a breathless frenzied spiel, warned of the threat as follows. Humanists, he said, have been planted in strategic places in the United Nations. They teach children in public schools to read the word scientific humanism as soon as they're old enough to read. And 275,000 humanists control the American government, education, and media. If you've ever heard some of the Alex Jones conspiracy theories, one world government, the Illuminati, you hear the Ron Paul supporters talking about this stuff, that's where they're actually getting it from, is from Pat Robertson and James Thompson, one world government, secular humanists. As conspiracy paranoia mounted, politics and church began to subvert the innocent, Jesus-loving expressions of faith I'd known in the beginning. Our churches started distributing candidate scorecards in the foyers, telling us to vote accordingly. And then there was a radio preacher, William Stewart McBurney, whose Voice of Americanism program daily rehashed Senator McCarthy's and Carl McIntyre's Red Scare fundamentalism, updating it for the mid-1980s. We had much to fear and many to loathe. Then he goes on to talk about meeting Francis Schaeffer, who is the father of Frank Schaeffer. Yes, Frank Schaeffer, who you may or may not have seen on television, on MSNBC. He's been on Amy Goodman's show, Democracy Now! He's just kind of been on all of the progressive shows trying to sound the warning bells because he has left the movement and he's saying these people are serious. They are not joking. And his father actually was one of the major proponents of Christian Reconstruction, whom, by the way, Michelle Bachmann said that she looks up to. Yes. And it goes on from there. I don't think I'm going to read this whole thing to you, but you kind of get the idea of what the biblical patriarchy, equivocal movement is about, the kinds of people who are promoting this. And although on theocracywatch.org, when they go into this description of what is Christian Reconstruction, what is dominionism, and how we can't label all of these Christian fundamentalists, dominionists, and so on, and that we have to make these distinctions, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I don't think we can anymore because they're mainstreaming this. And this is everybody that, you know, that generally I've always ignored. I've known about James Dobson and Focus on the Family, but I had no idea that this was the sort of ideology that he was promoting in Pat Robertson, and that it's infiltrating into talk radio. Rush Limbaugh, they actually give us the secular version of this ideology when they spout off, like calling this university student that was left out of the hearing in Congress about contraception a slut, and you know, just, and then it went from there to Fox News, and it went to the internet, and this basically is, you know, the old adage, you know, the men are tempted and it's your fault, therefore we burn you at the stake. So just real quick, Michelle Bachmann, I wanted to talk about this real quick, the submission movement. There's a video that surfaced where in 2006, Michelle Bachmann appeared to speak in front of a Christian group at a church. And what she said was that the Lord says be submissive. Wives, you are to be submissive to your husbands. And then she goes on to this whole spiel about how her husband was the one that told her that she should become a tax attorney. Her husband was the one that told her. And it goes into, you know, how wives, you are to be submissive. And this is all, what she is doing is dog whistling these Christian fundamentalist values voters. I'm your candidate. I'm the one who's going to impose my worldview legally through law. Then we have here David Barton. Barton suggests biblical law is best for women. Old Testament biblical law. Now this guy, he would seem pretty harmless, but he is responsible for the Texas textbook massacre. He is also responsible for the Christian Zionist movement, partly responsible, I should say, not solely. Tom Hagee is a big one, but he is within that group, starting war in the Middle East, because that is, you know, we are living in the end times, and that is the place where Jesus will return. But first, you know, and this is the last generation, and that's a whole other story right there. But anyways, this is David Barton on Glenn Beck, repeatedly promoting his biblical law constitution. And also Michelle Bachmann hit him up after the 2010 election to teach a constitution class to the incoming freshmen of the House of Representatives. Yes. So, and we're not talking history, we're talking pseudo-history. Chris Rhoda, who actually works for with Mikey Weinstein, actually has a book out refuting, correcting David Barton's misrepresentations. I'm just going to say lies, because he just makes things up to support his Christian worldview. We're a Christian nation, and so on and so forth.
Karen, can we go ahead and
Stop.
move into some questions? Sure.
Let me just real quick. I know I've gone over time. It's so long. Just real quick. This election. This is Champion the Vote. Newt Gingrich is in a video that is being, with Rick Perry, other Christian right, appearing in videos that they're showing throughout these mega churches and so on, that are being broadcast to get these religious voters to the polls. And they are now engaged in data mining, where they are looking for Christians that they can target to register them to vote, hand them their Judeo-Christian voter guides, and send them off to the polls to vote for Rick Santorum. Now, originally this was supposed to have benefited Newt Gingrich, but we all know that Newt Gingrich is very far behind, and who it's actually going to benefit is Rick Santorum. And if you've heard Rick Santorum talk at all, does not believe in the separation of church and state like many of the other candidates from 2010 who actually publicly expressed that belief. So, just so that everybody understands, we cannot, rational people cannot sit out the vote. We cannot do it, because they will take advantage of us and say, okay, well, you know, these guys are all disillusioned with Obama, and so we're going to go to the polls, and we're going to get as many people there to vote, and we're going to vote for Santorum. And God help us. So, yes?
By any chance, do you have a list of foreign countries willing to accept religious refugees?
Well, I can tell you that because of the doings of the family. Anybody read the book by Jeff Charlotte? This is part 2. The first part is the family. It talks about these Christian fundamentalist congressmen and their doings in foreign affairs, and how they seek out wealthy, moneyed interests, men of authority, of power in other countries. So, no, Canada has elected as their president one of these Christian fundamentalists. They're trying to undo their national health program. They're trying to outlaw freedom of speech. They're trying to squash freedom of assembly, kind of like what's happening here right now. Usually meet with the Occupy movement, the treatment that these protesters are getting. Yeah, Britain. There are MPs in the British government who are Christian fundamentalists. And what they've done is started here, and they've just gone all over and spread it everywhere. And you know, these are at the highest levels of government.
They're talking about a world government after all.
Yes.
In their image.
Yes, that's what they mean, world dominion. It sounds crazy, I know, but they've actually made inroads, and it's scary. So no, there's no place to hide. You have to fight back.
For years undercover, and then they would.
Yeah. Well, in some respects, I wouldn't mind if Rick Santorum got the Republican candidacy for president. Because in the latest polls that I looked up this morning, Obama's leading him by over 10 points. And that's about almost half again over what Obama's leading Nick Romney.
Yeah, but they fill with the voting machines. You just don't know what they're going to do. So I think
at least public opinion thus far in the polls shows that. So.
Well,
and it's growing.
That's why I say, you know, people in this country who still believe in the principle of separation in church and state. I mean, it's in our Constitution, and the way that they describe it, that's a myth. That's not what was intended. Yeah.
Have you heard anything about the end-time video game for young people to convert or kill non-believers or Jews? Or
Yes. Yes, it's a really bloody, violent video game where the kids can go on this game and they can shoot liberals. Yeah, secular humanists and liberals, and although you can also switch sides. You can become a liberal and have your friends come after you. Yes, I have heard of it. It's sick.
I happened to be in Denver for one of my grandkids' first confirmation at Catholic Church. And I happened to be up there on the Sunday the bishop's letter was read in church on Obamacare. And that was when all the thing came out about the Catholic churches giving out contraceptives and everything. And the priest more or less came forward and said, we as a group should not vote for anybody that would have something like that. Kind of health care.
Well, they're doing it in all of their churches. Right? I mean, even though, you know, the IRS rules say that you cannot, you know, campaign for specific candidates. You can talk about issues and so on and so forth. That's normal, but no, they're telling people, and they're doing it openly on Christian Broadcasting Network, one after the other. Stands up there and says, do not vote for Obama, and of course, you know, Obama's the Antichrist, according to these people.
And they're trying to get a law through that they won't be limited on that they can politic all they want.
Yeah, they're trying to drive it up to the Supreme Court, actually, is what they're trying to do, which is why they're doing it openly now. And they figure that they've got 5 conservatives on the Supreme Court who, when it arrives there, they will say, they will, you know, send down a judgment in their favor and say, sure, you know, you can keep your tax exemption and you can go ahead and campaign for politicians in the church.
Are the Koch brothers, by any chance, part of this? Are they
They
Christian?
fund them.
I know. Now, why do they fund them? Are they looking
Because
for
of
labor? That's my theory.
There you go. That's part of it. Because the Christian right has decided, because they're teaching this biblical capitalism, which means that the Bible says, you know, we're against the minimum wage, we're against union, we are against Jesus. Actually, not we. Jesus was against deregulation. You know, they've got this justification for every single policy that the Koch brothers find beneficial. And that's, you know, whether it's propping up the oil companies and oil subsidies in favor of renewable energy, whether it's tort reform, whether it's anything that's pro-corporate, this group of Christian fundamentalists is for, and that's why it's called biblical capitalism. And actually,
they invented a whole new Jesus.
Yeah, they did, actually. They did, yes. It's completely upside down and backwards. And that's the thing that people don't understand. So when somebody goes on TV and tries to say, hey, warning, warning, don't, you know, look at what's happening. You guys have to, you can't sit out the vote. And then you get somebody like Herman Cain up there who says, well, you're attacking my religion. You can't attack our religion. Well, your religion has now become your politics. So actually, I'm not attacking your religion. I'm attacking your politics. We need to discuss it. We need to drag it out into the light of day and examine it. Because if this is something, as they claim, you know, that Americans are behind, well, I really think they should present their case to Americans and see what Americans think about it.
And have you heard, you know, there's so much talk about Mitt Romney, them not liking him because of his religion. Have you read, you know, because he seems to be leading no matter what they do or say or whatever. But yet, they say they don't, you know, they don't like his religion.
They don't like him, but, you know, Glenn Beck is also Mormon. And all of a sudden they're in love with Glenn Beck because he's promoting their agenda, their ideology. So it doesn't matter that he's Mormon. Mitt Romney is parroting all of these Christian right agenda items. I mean, word for word for word. You know, where formerly he would not have thought about banning birth control, and now he's for banning birth control. You know, formerly it's like, okay, Roe versus Wade, he wouldn't touch it, but now all of a sudden, yeah, let's ban abortion. So, you know, he's pretty much minding them. And yeah, they don't necessarily like him, but I think if he won the nomination, I think that they would all run to the polls and vote for him anyway. I mean, because anything's better than Obama.
One of the things about the candidates, Republican candidates, granted they are, you know, somewhat frightening in their stances that they're taking on those issues. But the real problem is not so much them as it is the political right-wing extremist political PACs that are forming to support these candidates with millions and millions and millions of dollars. And we're going to wind up having one of the dirtiest negative campaigns elections this coming year that we've ever had.
Well, Santorum, I just watched an ad on.
Romney's got the biggest number of right-wing political PACs that are behind him. They've been spending millions, in these primaries to get him in the lead. And they've been outspending, the other candidates.
Well, Mitt Romney is the
at least
Koch
2 to 1.
brothers candidate.
Pardon?
Mitt Romney is the Koch brothers, that corporate interest,
Right.
Wall Street,
Right.
that's their candidate.
Right.
That's who they want.
Yeah.
So he has to kind of, pander to the religious right, which I'm not sure that that's not wholly some pandering. I mean, because, he is a Mormon and he does contribute quite a lot of money to the Mormon church, and the Mormon church is not immune to this dominionist influence either. So, I kind of wonder, I don't know, I haven't really seen too much from Mitt. But I'm sorry.
No apology is necessary. Karen, thank you very much. I'll be soliciting some feedback from at least those individuals for whom I have email addresses, and seeing what your thoughts are about future programs revolving around this particular topic. So please, I'm going to see if there's a piece of paper somewhere where I can capture some email addresses.
I have the sign-up sheet.
Oh, okay, great. And again, there may be a few people that have some heart-burning questions that they'd like to share with you. Would you stick around for a little bit? That would be certainly wonderful. Again, we appreciate your spending time with us and sharing some pretty eye-opening information. And with that, I will call our meeting to a close. Thank you very much.